history across the years. But the reason it was powerful, because it was about expanding what it meant to be human, and because the people we gave rights to were human beings just like us. That's why we reject this notion of expanding rights as and when there's a group that needs it. The policy of team opposition is quite simple. It's going to be the status quo, where there might be certain protections against animals and for their welfare, but there isn't going to be a legal right to their protection in the way Joyanne suggested. At the end of the day, we're okay with laws like banning animal cruelty, or specific laws put in place like the Amsterdam Treaty. We would abolish them if you asked us, but because it's not up to us, we say if individual people and individual governments and the jurisdictions decide that for their own personal conscience, like Sam, who loves cats, they want to put such laws in place, then they can do so out of the goodness of their heart, but not because they were legally bound to do so. Our case is going to feature two things. First, rights, which I'm going to talk about, and second, robots, which Darren is going to talk about. Before that, some rebuttal. First of all, I want to clarify the point of information.
So,
we asked Joyanne whether they would, no thank you, in the same way pay for an ecosystem, perhaps with the livelihood of individual farmers on the ground. Would they ask people to pay for the survival of a drowning buffoon in the same way by asking them to jump into the water? She said it wasn't really the same issue. This reflects how confused they are. It is the same issue, because, no thank you, kid, if you ask people to compromise and concede parts of their own livelihood in exchange for the most crucial legal rights of other people, then you must also accept that this compromise comes at a cost to humanity as a whole. And this will be the bedrock of our substantive argumentation. They gave us three reasons why we should expand the ambit of rights. First, sentience. As Darren asked, and I defer to his authority on this because he reads a lot about it, what is sentience? Can you define sentience? Are you sure that that notion of sentience is the same notion that everyone in humanity, no thank you, subscribes to? More importantly, if that method of social organization and recognition is the only criteria for sentience, by that definition, animals or insects like ants who have some kind of a social hierarchy would be sentient as well. So we reject this, because if you're going to give us a criteria, no thank you, that expands into infinity, then we say we need to be very, very careful about whether you're going to grant such rights to such individuals. So sentience, as a vague concept in and of itself, means nothing at this stage. If they want to run this argument and resurrect it later on, they need to explain concretely what it means. Second, animals suffer. Again, we ask a very simple question. Why? Like, why would the average human being with no benefit to himself seek to go out there and kick a cat or kill a gorilla, no thank you, within a zoo? Particularly if you consider that zoos have a huge incentive to keep their animals alive. More importantly, even if they were going to suffer in some ways, we say the laws can exist that protect such animals out of the goodness of an individual's heart. This means that we often end up compromising on an animal's welfare only in the instances where the good to humanity is so overwhelming. In the most ridiculous of cases, like killing animals for no reason, there are plenty of other groups who will take up this cry, not just team proposition. Finally, they argue for justice. Again, this is a problem-solution mismatch. Perhaps some animals are being treated unjustly, but the way you get them to speak up for this is not to call them before some court of law, but to allow human beings who want to do so, like non-governmental organizations, to take up this fight for them. I'm going to show you why. No thank you, kid. The problem of justice becomes exacerbated on their side of the house. But by this practical logic, and this is the second tier of rebuttal, all animals who suffer potential injustice would fall under the ambit of this policy. Not just gorillas, primates, and dolphins. So this practical reason they try to use as a base principle for their case doesn't hold up unless they're prepared to accept the most ridiculous of scenarios in the future. Let's paint that scenario now. The premise of my constructive argument is twofold. First, you must enforce this policy, which they've conceded as much to. And second, because animals can't communicate with us, we often have to be extremely generous in a presumption in favor of their rights. Why? Rights have to be limited, hold on a moment, kid, in our society. They have to be limited because when everyone makes absolute claims all the time, it's an unviable situation in society. Before I show you why animals can't do this, yes?
Babies can't defend themselves in court either. That's why we have people who have superior intellect defending the rights for them.
Yes, but as we talked about, right, there's a certain amount of sentience that a baby will be able to attain. Whatever the definition of sentience you want to use, both sides agree that that extends to human beings, pretty much all-encompassing them with some small exceptions. And that's a different debate. So the burden on team proposition is if they want to use sentience as a reason to do this, no thank you. It is their burden to show what this sentience is and how exactly it can be certified. Why is it that rights are unlimited when it comes to animals? They can't communicate with us, and you can't appeal to some common notion of justice and fairness as a result. Let me illustrate this for you. What happens when we always perpetually presume in favor of such animals when it comes to their rights? What happens, for instance, when a group of dolphins, suppose they can, take up a claim against a dam that is going to block off their living area, hence threatening their right to life? You might get a judge to adjudicate on the situation, and the judge might say, alright dolphins, your claim is unjust, you can't come here anymore. But because you can't communicate this to them, they're still going to end up swimming in those areas. And if you do decide to build that dam, you end up hurting them anyway, defeating the spirit of Team Proposition's case. So this means that human beings often have to retreat in the face of expansion of animals as they claim more and more rights. The compromise behind the principle of rights is gone. Why is this unjust? It is unjust because this system of rights becomes arbitrary. One group has absolute power over the other. Rights are meaningless, no thank you, if one government or one company or one party can take whatever they want at the expense of someone else, without someone being able to use reason to say, is this a fair compromise? Are you being just in the process? So this arbitrary system of rights is no better than a system of rights that doesn't exist at all, because the actions of the animals end up being what we have to presume in favor of. This quite evidently breaks the point of justice in rights as well, because justice relies on two individuals coming to settle some kind of a claim. No thank you. No thank you, madam. And if we can't do that, then this, quite clearly doesn't work out. But don't take the principal argument from me alone. What is the conclusion of Team Proposition's case? It is absurd. It is absurd because if they continue to expand, no thank you, living areas for animals in Africa or in the oceans, human activity ceases completely in all of these areas. You can already begin to see why. Because if every time an animal moves into a human area, we are forced to retreat. Eventually, this becomes a situation where other things like food, water, or living area becomes far harder for human beings to find. So inclusiveness as a principle that Joanne talked about sounds good on paper, but if they don't consider the consequences of this inclusiveness, it can't possibly be a system of rights that cares for everyone as a whole. But last of all, let me argue to you on the final tier why animals in their world are hurt as well. In the status quo, human beings try to get along with animals. But when you tell the African farmer he can no longer farm on this land because elephants are roaming nearby, the amount of backlash you're going to get is tremendous. Because now my movement or my livelihood as an individual is threatened. And most crucially, I have no respite. I can't go to a court, I can't go to a media and dispute this decision if a legal right exists. This is why, for instance, in Africa, elephants that receive absolute protection are killed in secrecy. Not because they want to be sold, but because the people who are taking care of their land simply can't deal with a situation where elephants overfeed and basically take up all of their area, rendering their living situation untenable. It is also why in these circumstances, people are less willing to give money to charitable organizations. Because now you pit humanity as a whole against the rights of a few animals. This is why Team Opposition is very proud to stand for rights. We're very proud to oppose.